Well, hello, friends, and welcome back to the Bible for Dummies here at Chapel by the Sea Presbyterian Church on Fort Myers Beach. Welcome to those of you who are with me and to those of you watching online. We're continuing with our walk through the story of God's people and God's creation. And this is our spiritual DNA. This is who we are and where we come from as God's people. So these are like it or not, these are our ancestors, what we're stuck with. So today we're going to go into the second part, look at the patriarchs, the leaders of the original people from the Israelites who are our ancestors in the faith. And the way to remember it is, a wandering Aramean was my father. It starts in Genesis, a description of who these people are. So we begin with Abram and Sarai, who become Abraham and Sarah, and Hagar and Keturah. Abram's quite a guy. They're going to give birth to Isaac, who will marry Rebekah. They're going to give birth to Jacob and Esau, twins who are, what's the term? Not identical twins. Fraternal twins, not identical twins. And Jacob's going to marry Rachel and Leah. He's going to have kids by their maids, Bilhah and Zilpah. And eventually he's going to have 12 sons and one daughter, Dinah. And these 12 sons are Joseph and his brothers. These are where we get the 12 tribes of Israel. The setting. Where does all this take place? Okay, this is going to take place in Ur of the Chaldees over here, all the way over to Egypt on the other side, Egypt of the Pharaohs. So this is labeled the Crescent of Crisis. That cover is from January of 1979. So this has been an issue for the world since the time of 1800 BC. In between these two is the land of Canaan, which is now Israel in modern day settings. And then and now, it still influences the world. So this fertile crescent from Egypt all the way across to what's modern day Iraq, all the way down to Basra, is where all the story takes place. And we'll see that they represent the extremes of geography. On the one hand, you've got a chaotic world, on the other hand, a very orderly world. And so we're going to go from one end of the crescent to the other in our story. This is the first part is Ur of the Chaldees, Mesopotamia, modern day Iraq, what was Persia. It's the region between the rivers. That's what the Greek literally means. Meso, between Potamia rivers. And the story begins in Ur, down in the southeast. It becomes Babylon and is then conquered by Persia. It's now Iran and Iraq, as I said. But it's an unstable world. The weather is extreme, floods, storms, famine, and unlike last Sunday, you don't have early warning alerts to let you know when it's a tornado coming. They just suffer with it. It's also politically unstable. There's warring kings back and forth, warring tribes back and forth, and it's a very perilous place to live. And Assyria and then Babylon develop over time and overlap stories, but it's a well-developed civilization. By 3000 BC, they have writing, they have their system of laws in place. You can see the artwork. This is the Ishtar Gate in what was Babylon. And the religion is well developed. Both of these countries have nature religions around the sun, the moon, the earth. It's polytheistic, and all the gods are related. And there's Anu, the god of heaven, and Enlil, the air god, Enki, the god of waters and wisdom, Marduk, who's the chief god, Ishtar, who's the goddess of war and love, and Nabu, god of wisdom and science, Sin, the moon god. But religious life in Babylon was dominated by evil spirits and demons in the people's thinking. So there's statues of gods in the homes, and these are important things to have. And we're going to see in our story that they're going to play a role as we go forward. But everybody got their little shrines in their homes. And the religious festivals involved everyone. The king was representative of the gods, and the priests control the economy. They've got the purse strings. Women play a major role in the religious life of Babylon, or the Chaldean world. They were key figures in mythology. The high priestess represents the nation. You have a core of sacred prostitutes, but along with that, you have a core of sacred nuns, which I've never figured out how you have the two. So the individual relates to the gods. There's no established moral order, so everybody does what's right in their own eyes. There's fear of God. There's a sense of fatalism, resignation with the way things go. So they commune with God via prayers, omens, incantations, and they seek to discern what's going to happen by use of astrology, numerology, oaths, and curses. The mythology is well developed. The Gilgamesh Epic tells the story of a great flood. This is like 1,000 years before Noah. And it's well written, all documented. You have a legal system in place. Hammurabi's code is written on cuneiform on clay tablets, and it's the oldest system of law that we know of that's recorded in the world. The cuneiform writing is these little marks. You take a stylus and press it into wet clay. Then they're dried or fired to make the record. There's 60 symbols that are used, and it was slow to be translated until they finally located some tablets that had multiple languages on it. And if you knew one language, you could correlate and start working backwards and figure out how to translate the others. But we have extensive tablets and markers. We get a picture of the world from the trade documents that survive. Among them are references to cities that are mentioned in the Bible. Now, this is a drawing of the library, if you will, at Tel Marduk in Syria. This was sacked and burned, I think, about 25 or 2800 BC. And when it was burned, all the tablets collapsed in the fire and were fire hardened. So, 4,000 years later, archaeologists discovered them, and when they opened up, here they've got the whole library. And because they collapsed straight down, you have the sequence, how they were filed as well. A lot of information came from that. We've got religious texts, we've got legal documents, we've got whole libraries on these things. And archaeology provides us with lots of answers because we have so much information. Dozens of languages and references to other peoples and nations. And one of the most surprising ones for scholars was as they started translating these trade documents, they found out how many amphoras of wine were sent to places like Sodom and Gomorrah. That was the first confirmation that these places were not mythological, but were real, and people were trading with them. Okay, the other extreme is Egypt. Whereas Ur of the Chaldees is chaotic and unpredictable, Egypt is very predictable. It's a stable world, and everything revolves around the Nile River. Its development is at the same time as the Assyrian Babylonian history, 3000 BC. And the first dynasty of Egypt is about 3100 BC. Everything revolves around the Nile. All of life is premised on that. And it's seen in maternal terms. It's also seen in religious terms. But every year it floods. Every year it brings fresh soil. The floods bring fresh soil down to the land. It's predictable. Life stays around the Nile. You just go a few miles away from it and you're into the desert. So the desert becomes a buffer that protects the civilization along the river as well. And like I say, we have a well-developed system of life, sophisticated culture. These guys are carpenters. And these guys, anybody want to guess? Bead makers. And this one, yeah, which kind?
Pottery, sculptors,
Goldsmiths. You're both on the right track, yeah. But a well-developed, sophisticated culture. And it's a culture of imperial power. This is much more unified than the other end, the Ur of the Chaldees. This is unified around the Pharaoh, and it's a powerful empire. It's the most powerful empire of the world at the time. Again, the religion is nature-based, polytheistic. There's many gods. They're all related to one another, and they're grouped together. And the other thing was, it wasn't really coherent because the theology changed frequently. And everything revolves around the earth, the air, the sky, sun, moon, animals, and most of all, the Nile. To give you some illustrations, Isis and Osiris are sister and brother and husband and wife. He's the corn god. He dies every year and is reborn. So, like the grain. Ammon, god of the air, he's the king of the gods. Anubis is the jackal god. Horus, god of kings. Ra, the sun god. Seth, Upper Egypt. Sobek, god of the river. Thoth, moon and wisdom. Ta, patron of craftsmen. Hathor, goddess of love and music. Nephthys, goddess of women. And I just love this trio. I just put it up there because it's fun to look at. Nut, the goddess of the sky. Shu, goddess of the air. Geb, god of the earth. All, like I said, all related. But the big one is Aton, the sun god. Think about the names of some of the pharaohs. Tutankhamun and Akhenaten. All of them taking one of the gods' names as part of their name. Different pharaohs. Okay, between these two worlds emerges a new player. Abram, with his family and his flocks. Now, about 1800 BC, Abram's father Terah and his son decide they're going to move. So they migrate up the river, up along Fertile Crescent, and down into Canaan. At Haran, up here in modern-day Syria, Terah dies. And some of the family remains there because we're going to see that there's more movement back and forth between Haran and Canaan as the story unfolds. Abram goes on to Canaan, and he's 75 years old when this takes place. You know, when most of us would be retiring, he sets out on a new life. And in Genesis 12, he and his wife and his nephew Lot make the journey, and God makes a covenant with him. To you and your descendants, I will give this land. So as they're living there, famine comes on and things are tough. So he takes Sarai and they go down to Egypt. And he says, look, you're very beautiful. He's 75, so she's 65. And he said, you're very beautiful. And when we get there, Pharaoh's going to like you so much, he'll kill me and take you as his wife. So say you are my sister. This guy's a piece of work. And they do. And that's what happens. Pharaoh says, oh, I like this. And he liked this woman. And he takes her into his harem, makes her one of his wives. And then things start falling apart for Pharaoh. And his priests say, oh, well, that Hebrew woman you've taken on, she's the problem. And he finds out that, in fact, she's married to Abram. And he says, what have you done? And he kicks him out of the kingdom with plenty of money, buys him off and sends them away. Later, he and Lot get into a conflict over who's grazing where, and so they split up. Lot takes the lower territory down by the river, and that's where Sodom and Gomorrah are. And Abram takes the higher ground, more elevated pastures. In Genesis 15, he's given a promise of land and descendants. And in 16, since he has no heir, Sarai hasn't been able to have children, so she gives him her handmaid. And with her handmaid, he fathers Ishmael. Hagar is the mother, Ishmael is the son. Ishmael is his half-son. In Genesis 17, when he's 99 and Sarah is 90, God appears to him and changes his name to Abraham, changes her name from Sarai to Sarah, and he institutes circumcision as the sign of the covenant. So all this is unfolding as Abram's life goes on. In Genesis 18, a son is promised to them. Two visitors come to him at his tent, and as they're eating, they say, when we come back next year, Sarah will have a son. Excuse me. Sarah's in the tent, and when she hears this, she laughs inadvertently. I'm 90 years old. It's ceased to be after the manner of women for me. In other words, she's past menopause. So how am I going to have a child? And they say, is anything too wonderful for God? And so they also tell him the judgment is going to fall on Sodom and Gomorrah. And Lot and his wife are spared. They leave the city, and then they're destroyed. And then later, Abraham, while she's pregnant, passes her off to another king, Abimelech, as his sister again. I'm thinking, doesn't this guy ever learn? And same thing happens there. Abimelech finds out that she's his wife, kicks him out of the country again. Finally, after 9 months, they have a son, and they name him Isaac, which means laughter. And so they're rejoicing, but tension develops between Hagar and Sarah, because now, although Ishmael is the firstborn son, Isaac is the chosen son. The one will get the birthright. So Sarah forces him to drive Hagar and Ishmael away. And they're banished, and the story goes that they're out lost in the wilderness, and she's afraid she's going to die, and miraculously an angel comes and saves them. And he becomes the father of all the Arab peoples. So you have the father of the Jews and the father of the Arabs, from all being descendants of Abraham. So we speak of these as the Abrahamic faiths. In Genesis 22, we have a striking development. God tells Abraham, take your son, your only son whom you love, go to the mountain that I will show you, and offer him as a sacrifice to me. What's he going to do? This is the guy who's twice, passed his wife off as his sister. Anyway, shockingly enough, he obeys. And he takes Isaac up, and just as he's about to kill him, God stops him. He says, I know now that you follow me, you will obey me, so I will make of you a great and mighty nation. The story goes on, life continues. Sarah dies, and after her death, Isaac is married to Rebekah. Abraham sends a servant back to Haran that we saw up in Syria to family, and finds a cousin, brings her back and marries her to Isaac. This is after Sarah's death. So now Abraham marries Keturah. And this is what I have forgotten about. He has 6 more sons by Keturah. I always thought in my mind it was just Ishmael and Isaac. But no, he's got 6 more kids. But when he dies, eventually, it's Isaac and Ishmael together who bury their father. We would think of them as being totally separate. But no, there's a lot of commonality between the two. So now the story shifts over to Isaac and Rebekah. They have twin sons, like I said, fraternal twins. Esau, who's the rugged outdoorsman, and Jacob, who is the quiet kid, but the conniver. The name Jacob means heel grabber, which is a term meaning con artist. So he's the slick one. Now, another little detail that slips by is while these kids are growing up, Isaac goes down to Abimelech, the same guy that his father sojourned with, and he passes Rebekah off as his sister, just like his father did. I'm going, what? Like father, like son? What is with these guys? Same thing happens. He gets kicked out and goes back. And eventually, as the story unfolds, Rebekah favors Jacob. And the birthright is going to go to Esau because he was the first twin born. And Rebekah conspires with her son, and since Esau is a very hairy, muscular guy, they put sheep fleece over his arms so they feel hairy, and dress him up. Isaac's almost blind at this point, and he's hard of hearing. So he takes the meal into his father and says, give me your blessing. And he says, oh, you don't sound like, is everything all right? Your voice sounds different. Oh, it's okay. Come here, let me feel your arms. And he feels that, oh yeah, you're hairy. You're Esau. So he gives Jacob the blessing. And Jacob does this because earlier he had connived, has told, when his brother came in hungry, Jacob was making a lentil stew, and his brother says, "Give me something to eat before I die." And he says, "Well, okay, but you got to give me your birthright. You can have my birthright. All right, just give me something to eat before I die." So now Jacob's carrying through on that promise. He gets the birthright. Esau is furious when he finds out and wants to kill him. What does Jacob do? He goes back to Haran, where his mother's from, to his uncle Laban's place. On the way, he stops and camps out for the night and has a dream in which he sees a great ladder going up to heaven and angels ascending and descending from heaven on this ladder. And he said, "Surely the Lord is in this place." When he woke, he made a stone marker and named the place Bethel, house of God. That's where this whole thing about we are climbing Jacob's ladder. It comes from that dream he had. So he goes to Haran and to his mother's home and lives with his uncle Laban. And he falls in love with Rachel, one of Laban's daughters. And he works out an agreement. Yes, you can have her as your wife. The dowry will be you work for me for 7 years. So Jacob works for 7 years. They have the wedding, and in the darkness, he goes in and lays down with his wife, and in the morning wakes up and, oops, it's her sister, Leah, that he's married, not Rachel. And says to him, "What have you done?" And he says, "Oh, I thought you knew, it's our tradition. You always marry the eldest daughter first. So he says, "Well, what about Rachel?" He says, "Well, give me 7 more years and you can marry Rachel." So he works 14 years to claim Rachel as his wife. Now, along the way, he prospers as a herdsman. He's very good at managing the livestock and becomes wealthy. And jealousy develops between Laban's family and Jacob. And so Jacob's seeing the handwriting on the wall, and God says to him in a dream, "It's time for you to go back to your homeland." So he waits till Laban and the boys are off shearing. That gives him a 3-day head start. And he takes off with his whole family, all of his herds. So you can imagine this is not a fast escape. When you're driving that much livestock, you're going to move slow. And with him, he takes his 12 sons and his 1 daughter, and they sneak away. And after 7 days, Laban catches up with them and says, "What have you done? Why didn't you let me say goodbye to my grandchildren, my daughters?" And he says, "By the way, you stole my family idols. I want them back." And he knows nothing about it. He says, "All right, I didn't steal them. Search the camp. If you find them, you can slay the person who stole them." Rachel's the one who stole them. So she hides them in a saddlebag and then sits on it and puts it under her robe. And when they come in the tent to search, she says, "I'm sorry, I'm having my period. I can't get up." And they say, "Oh, well, we have to leave you alone then." And they go away. So this is the last reference we're going to find to these kinds of gods in this family. When he gets back almost to Canaan, just before he's to cross over, they camp for the night. And during the night, he meets an angel and he wrestles with the angel during the night. And as dawn is coming, he says, the angel says, "Let me go." And he says, "I won't let you go until you give me a blessing." So the angel says, "I will give you a new name. You are Jacob. Now you are Israel, the one who wrestles with God." And the next, as dawn breaks, he's very strategic in the way he does this. He sends his wife and kids across first, then he sends livestock and gifts for his brother, and he comes last. But he reconciles with Esau, and he lives as a herder, and he raises his 12 sons and 1 daughter. And the sons are from Leah, his first wife, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Zebulun, Judah, and Issachar. Rachel gives him Joseph and Benjamin, but he also has children by their handmaids. So Bilhah, Leah's maid, gives him Dan and Naphtali, and Zilpah gives him Gad and Asher. So when we talk about the biblical view of the family, this never comes up, right? We're talking about monogamy, but all through this period, we're seeing polygamy. Rachel dies while she's giving birth to Benjamin, and it breaks his heart. But he takes the family and the flocks to Canaan. And at this point, he removes all those foreign gods from the family and names a place, the Lord is Israel's God, and declares for everybody that from now on, I'm following the Lord. And so the next phase of the story begins, and this is the story of Joseph and his brothers. Popularized as Joseph in the amazing Technicolor dream coat. It was actually a tunic, probably. But nonetheless, Joseph, daddy's brat, is hated by his brothers, by his 11 brothers. His 10 older brothers, rather. Benjamin's younger than he. They call him the dreamer because he has all these dreams and he tells them about them. Oh, I had a dream that my father, my mother, and my brothers would bow down to me. This did not make him popular. So one time when he comes out to the fields where they're keeping sheep, they take him and they sell him into slavery in Egypt. And they tell their father Israel that he was killed by wild animals. Well, breaks Israel's heart, but nonetheless, that leaves him with just Benjamin, his other favorite son, which is important in the story. He is sold to a Captain Potiphar, who is a high official in the Pharaoh's government, and Potiphar makes him his chief steward. So he is in charge of this whole estate. He's running it, and apparently he's doing a very good job. But Potiphar's wife gets a crush on him, and when she can't seduce him, she cries rape, and he's sentenced to prison. Well, while he is in prison, he is also two other guys in the prison are Pharaoh's baker and his butler. Each of them has a dream. They tell it to Joseph, and he interprets it. And the baker, he says, is going to be executed, and the butler will be reinstated into Pharaoh's good graces. And that is, in fact, what happens. So when the butler's being released, Joseph says, don't forget about me. You know, I want to get out of here too. He forgets it for 2 years. And 2 years later, Pharaoh has this very disturbing dream that nobody can interpret. And the butler says, oh, I know somebody. And they bring out Joseph, and he tells him that, well, what the dream means is there's going to be a 7-year famine. We're going to have 7 years of plenty, and then there's going to be a 7-year famine. So we got to get ready for it. And Pharaoh is so impressed, he makes him the second most powerful man after himself in the empire. And Egypt becomes a granary for the world. And all the wealth of the world flows to Egypt during the famine, because that's the only place they can get food. And so all the people of the world are coming there to purchase grain, including his brothers. They come down to Egypt because they're starving up in Canaan. And he recognizes them, and he treats them harshly. And in the end, he forces them to leave Simeon behind. And he says, I want to see this younger brother of yours. I don't believe you. Bring Benjamin to me. They say, no, that would break our father's heart. Simeon is left behind as the hostage. And they go back, and eventually they do return with Benjamin. And there's this frightening series of encounters with the governor. And they can't figure out what's going on. They're terrified because this guy has the authority to have them executed. They said, you are like Pharaoh himself. And he plays a cat and mouse game with them. And you wonder, how could they not recognize him? He's their brother. I mean, they should have been able to see clearly, this is the kid we sold, shouldn't they? You recognize him? That's me, 17 years old. That's why they couldn't recognize him. Number one, he's probably 20 or 30 years later. He's matured. He's changed physically, and he is in a very, very different role and context. It's not surprising that they didn't recognize him. But finally, he does it. He reveals his identity to them. And he says, is my father still alive? Yes. Okay. Well, they bring the whole family, move the entire extended family, herds, everything down to Egypt. And they are settled in Goshen, which is on the east side of the Nile River. Jacob dies in Egypt, and according to his wishes, the family takes him back and buries him in Canaan. When Joseph dies, he requests that he would be buried in Canaan with the people when they return. So that puts us up to the next phase of the story. The date is about 1600 BC, and Egypt is now ruled by the Hyksos dynasty. This is a bunch of invaders who seized control of the country. And what we're going to find out is a new pharaoh arises in Egypt who does not know Joseph. And so that sets us up for the next phase of the story, which is bondage in Egypt. They go from welcome people to slaves. And that's going to set us up for the story of deliverance and the 10 Commandments. So this is the next part of the story we go to. So you're going to read about this in, I think, chapters 7 and 8. I'll tell you in just a moment. But what we remember is the way this is all described. A wandering Aramean was my ancestor. He went down to Egypt and lived there as an alien, few in number, and there he became a great nation, mighty and populous. When the Egyptians treated us harshly and afflicted us by imposing hard labor on us, we cried out to the Lord, the God of our ancestors. So next time we'll look at Exodus and conquest. Read chapters 7 and 8 of the Bible for Dummies. And we're looking at Exodus 1 through 20, Joshua, Judges, and Ruth. So that's a lot of material, but if you read chapters 7 and 8, that'll summarize it for you. And we'll take an in-depth look at that next week as we continue with our study on the Bible for Dummies. Whew. Any questions?
Yeah, I don't understand. I'm wondering about the ages of these people.
Yeah, isn't it? Yeah.
It's amazing because what I hear is like right now, life expectancy's been going up since since my time.
Yeah.
It seems to be going up, and boy, these people, I thought people that used to die at 50 years old. These people are really old.
I think Abraham's 185 when he dies, according to the text.
So what's the?
That's, well, remember that list of questions I want to ask God?
Okay, that's one of the questions.
That's one of the questions. That's a big one. Yeah. I mean,
Maybe their calendar's different.
maybe the count. I mean, he's 99 years old when he fathers Isaac. I don't. And then he had 6 more kids.
Right.
I don't know. These ages baffle me. I mean, look, they say Noah was 600 years old when he built the ark. That's one of the ones that I can't get my head around. And I'm not going to manufacture or fabricate an answer.
Yeah.
I'm just as confused. But I guess I don't look at the age. I look at the what happened. What was the story that we're being told. Yeah. And so, it's history, but there's story in there as well. Well, friends, thank you for joining us, and we'll continue this little journey through our spiritual DNA as we look at our family of faith. As we continue our study on the Bible for Dummies here at Chapel by the Sea Presbyterian Church on Fort Myers Beach. Thank you. Stay warm, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.